Aloha, I'm Carolyn Tanaka, and welcome to another segment of Live at the Legislature. Every week we'll be sitting down with various members of the House of Representatives to talk about issues, concerns, and whatever else is happening here at the state legislature. This morning we have with us Representative Greg Takayama. He is the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and he represents Pearl City, Waimalu, and Pacific Palisades. Good morning, Representative.
Good morning, Carolyn. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here. Well, you know, as the chair of the public safety, under public safety comes corrections and civil defense.
Yes.
Now, this past January, we had the false missile alert. What became very clear was that we were totally unprepared. State government, county government, private sector, tourism, DOE.
That's a great point, Carolyn. You know, January 13th happened on a Saturday. Now, just imagine if it happened on a school day. I personally think it would have been chaos. Not so much among the schools themselves, because, you know, they have drills where they take shelter, but imagine the number of parents who would be rushing to the schools when, you know, the word that emergency management tries to send out is, if it's an immediate case of a missile coming in, you need to take shelter immediately. You only have 15 or 20 minutes. And so there's no time to go pick up your children. There's no time to drive somewhere else. You need to take shelter immediately. But, you know, I imagine that there'd be a large number of parents trying to pick up their children from their neighborhood schools. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one example of how I think January 13th showed that we're not really prepared for an emergency like that.
You could, Representative, you could sort of call it, in a warped sort of way, a blessing in disguise.
I think you're right, yeah.
You ran the joint public informational hearing that we had in January about the false missile alert. Yeah. So now we're in session. What are some of the things that the legislature, that the House is taking a look at to attack?
Well, one of the bills that we're moving in the State House is one to take a bigger look at what happened, the circumstances of the emergency drill, and our preparedness or lack of preparedness as a community for a disaster, whether it's a tsunami or a hurricane or an incoming missile. One of the bills we're pushing is to create an emergency preparedness task force that brings in all segments of the community, from the schools, the UH, the business community, our shippers, and really take a deep look at what we really need to do as a community to prepare for an emergency. For example, if there were a disaster, whether it's a tsunami or a hurricane, that affected our Honolulu harbor. It's the only harbor that's capable of offloading containers. Mm-hmm. So imagine that there were a hurricane or a nuclear attack that disabled Honolulu harbor. We would not be able to ship anything to the neighbor islands because none of the neighbor islands have the capacity to offload container ships. So even though their stores may have a capacity of a few days or even a couple weeks of food supplies, it's estimated that the harbor would take many months to be repaired. So what do you do in the meantime? There's no backup plan.
Is there any, besides the task force, is there anything else that the legislature's taking a look at?
One of the other bills that we're pushing along is to provide that all new government buildings, including schools, provide for some kind of emergency shelter that's a hurricane-safe shelter. You know, we spend millions of dollars every year to retrofit our older schools to provide some kind of hurricane-safe shelter. But at the same time, there are no standards for requiring new buildings to have that shelter capacity. So, you know, conceivably, we're going to be spending millions to retrofit schools we're building even now. So why not make them safe to begin with?
Well, I am sure that this thing it was still in the news, a front page story again today, so I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about this, and that the legislature will probably be holding some more hearings and things.
We certainly will be. You know, the governor's commission General Hara to do a 30-day and a 45-day report on what happened and steps that are being taken to prevent it from happening again. Well, we're pretty close to the 30-day report, so we're taking a look at maybe having a briefing for us to find out the findings of the report.
Well, good. Moving on, Greg, you are also the co-chair of the Kupuna Caucus.
That's right.
And it's not because you're a Kupuna.
Although
no,
I am, yes.
Although you are, but you don't have to be a member of the Kupuna Caucus
right.
to be in the caucus. But let's talk about some of the major issues facing our senior citizens today. And I understand that there is a particular bill, the Kupuna Caregiver Bill, that we are particularly proud of.
That's right. You know, last year, Hawaii became the first state in the country to enact a special law that takes care or tries to take the first step in taking care of our working caregivers. You know, there are more than 100,000 family caregivers here in Hawaii. It's a tradition, largely a Hawaiian tradition for our families to take care of our older ones. And we have, as I said, 150,000 family caregivers here in Hawaii. Well, oftentimes the family caregivers are working full-time. Oftentimes they tend to be women. And so what we've done is provide a small so-called stipend, up to $70 a day for these family caregivers to apply for and maybe send their loved ones to a adult daycare program, so they can still continue to work, remain in the workforce. And as I said, we're in the second year now. We're seeking $2 million to expand the program, and hopefully the bill will move. We'll have a hearing on it tomorrow in the House.
What other issues, priority issues, has the caucus identified?
Well, you know, Hawaii has done really well in terms of taking care of our kupuna. AARP comes out with a survey every 2 years as to how well the 50 states do in this area. Hawaii consistently rates in the top 5. Regardless, even though the cost of nursing care is very high in Hawaii, we still do very well compared to other states. And so one of the big programs is Kupuna Care, which enables our elderly to remain at home for as long as they can, rather than go into nursing homes.
What are the challenges, though, Representative, in funding these programs?
Well, you know, it's always a competition every year for dollars because there are so many needs in the state. So Kupuna compete with Keiki and working families and everyone else for their share of the dollars. What's important to remember is that our numbers of kupuna are growing. In about 15 years, fully 1/3 of our state will be over the age of 60.
Great. Well, thank you. There is so much more that we could talk about on both the civil defense front and in the Kupuna area, but I'd like to thank you for joining us. And thanks to all of you for being with us again. And if you want to find out what's coming up here at the Ledge, please go to capital.hawaii.gov for all the information you ever wanted to have or know about the state legislature. Aloha, see you next week.